Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. You ready to tackle some Noli today?
Always ready for Riesel. Let's do it.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So today we're going deep on a character we haven't really focused on before, Aunt Isabel. And wow, did you all send in some fascinating research for this one?
Yeah, some really in-depth historical and literary analysis. I was impressed.
For sure. So before we get too deep into the weeds, let's just remind everyone who exactly Aunt Isabel is. Like, how does she fit into the whole story?
Right. So just to set the stage, she's Maria Clara's aunt and guardian. Basically, the closest thing Maria Clara has to a mother figure. She's super important in Capitan Tiago's household, too.
Gotcha. And okay, this is where those sources you guys sent come in big time.
Mhm.
Because to really get Aunt Isabel, we have to get the world she's living in, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the Philippines under Spanish rule, it wasn't exactly a walk in the park, especially if you weren't at the top of the social ladder.
And women especially face some serious limitations, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The sources paint a pretty clear picture of that. Like, their roles were largely defined by men, whether as wives, mothers, or in Aunt Isabel's case, guardians. And the church, the friars, they had a huge influence on everything.
So it's like this multi-layered system of power. And where does Aunt Isabel fall within all of that?
Well, she's connected to Capitan Tiago and Maria Clara.
Yeah, right.
So it's safe to say she's got some privilege, wealth, social standing.
But even with that, being a woman in that time period, there were still so many barriers.
Exactly. And Rizal shows us that so brilliantly through the choices Aunt Isabel makes, the things she says or doesn't say.
Yeah, like her interactions with Padre Damaso, those scenes are so loaded. It's like there's this whole power struggle happening beneath the surface.
Totally. On one hand, she's all deference and respect, like you'd expect from a woman towards a powerful religious figure. But then there are these little hints of defiance, almost like she's protecting Maria Clara in a way that challenges his authority.
It's like Riesel's giving us this peek behind the curtain.
Yeah.
You know, letting us see how these characters are navigating these insane power dynamics.
And it makes you think, what's really driving it, Isabel? Is she just playing by the rules, or is there something more going on beneath the surface?
I think there has to be more. I mean, her devotion to Maria Clara, it's fierce. It informs every decision she makes.
Right, and that protectiveness. Could that be a form of resistance in itself? I mean, in a world that constantly tries to control women, she's fighting to protect Maria Clara's well-being.
Whoa. Okay, I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. And there are times when her silence is so powerful, like she's holding back so much.
Exactly. Rizal is a master of unspoken tension, you know? He makes you read between the lines. And in Aunt Isabel's silences, we see a woman navigating a society that's determined to silence her.
It's like she's screaming without making a sound.
And it's brilliant.
It really is. Okay, so we're starting to get a sense of Aunt Isabel's world, the forces that are shaping her. But what about her internal world? What's going on inside her head?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. You know, it's amazing how Rizal uses even these characters who aren't like the main focus to show us just how messed up colonial society was.
Yeah, it's like even if you were part of the elite, you were still trapped in a way.
Exactly. And there's this concept that comes up in the sources, complicity, basically saying that even if you benefit from a system that's unjust, you're still kind of responsible for it just by being part of it.
Whoa, that's deep.
Yeah.
How does that apply to Aunt Isabel, though?
Think about it. She's living comfortably, right? Thanks to Capitan Tiago's wealth and status. And he's obviously super tight with the church and the whole colonial regime.
So she's benefiting from this system that's exploiting so many other Filipinos.
Yeah. And the price she pays for that comfort is her own voice, her agency.
It's like she's stuck, right? Like she can't really speak out against the system even if she wanted to.
And that brings us back to those internal conflicts we were talking about. It's almost like she knows things are wrong, but she also needs to protect herself and Maria Clara.
It's such a tough position to be in.
Yeah,
You want to fight for what's right, but you also have to be realistic about the consequences.
exactly. And Rizal doesn't give us any easy answers here. He shows us Aunt Isabel as this complex character capable of both going along with the system and subtly resisting it.
It's so human, right? Like, haven't we all felt that tension, wanting to speak out, but also not wanting to rock the boat too much?
Totally. Rizal was so good at capturing those universal human struggles and showing how they played out in this specific time and place.
It really makes you wonder, what if Aunt Isabel had had more freedom, more power? Would she have been like Abe Barra trying to change things?
That's the million-dollar question, and honestly, there's no way to know for sure.
But that's what's so cool about literature, right? It lets us explore these possibilities to imagine different paths.
Yeah, and it reminds us that these themes are still relevant today. You know how women are still expected to act a certain way to prioritize family over their own ambitions?
It's crazy how much of Aunt Isabel's story still resonates, even after all these years.
Riesel was way ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
Okay, so if we had to sum up Aunt Isabel's symbolic significance in Noli, what are the key takeaways?
Well, first, I think she shows us that complicity can be really subtle. It's not always about actively supporting something bad. Sometimes it's just about staying silent when you know things are wrong.
And second?
Second, she really embodies how complicated it was to be a woman in that society. You know, how they were both upholding tradition and resisting it at the same time.
It's like they were trapped in this system that they couldn't escape.
And that's what makes Aunt Isabel so fascinating to study. She might not be the main character, but she tells us so much about the world Riesel was writing about.
And about the human condition in general.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about Aunt Isabel's world, or her struggles, but there's this one thing that keeps popping up in the research, and that's education.
Oh, yeah, for
Well-
sure. Education was a huge deal in the Philippines back then.
Right, like it was this battleground between the old ways and new ideas.
Exactly. The Spanish and the church, they wanted to control what people learned. You know, keep things traditional, keep everyone in line.
But then you had these reformers like Ibarra who were pushing for a more modern education.
Yeah, Ibarra, he was all about science and critical thinking, empowering Filipinos to think for themselves.
And it makes me think about Aunt Isabel and Maria Clara. What kind of education did Maria Clara get?
Well, it's not explicitly stated in the novel, but given Aunt Isabel's background, it was probably a pretty traditional convent education.
You know, religion, domestic skills, all that stuff.
Exactly, the kind of education that was supposed to make you a proper young lady.
But so different from what Ibarra was fighting for.
Totally. It's like this clash of values playing out.
Right.
Tradition versus progress.
And it makes you wonder, where did Aunt Isabel stand on all of this? Did she ever question the limitations of her own education?
We can only guess. But it's interesting to think about, right? Maybe deep down she saw the need for something more, especially for Maria Clara.
Yeah, Maria Clara, she's always asking questions, pushing boundaries.
Maybe Aunt Isabel saw a bit of herself in Maria Clara, you know,
Yeah.
this desire for something more.
That's an awesome point.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of makes Aunt Isabel even more tragic in a way.
Yeah, like she's stuck between these two worlds.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive on Aunt Isabel,
Yeah.
what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away?
I think it's this. Don't dismiss the so-called minor characters. They often have the most to teach us.
I love that. And Aunt Isabel is the perfect example.
She might not be the star of the show,
Yeah.
but she reveals so much about Rizal's world and the complexities of Filipino society.
She reminds us that even seemingly ordinary people can have these incredible internal struggles.
Exactly. So yeah, keep thinking about Aunt Isabel as you read Noli. She's a key to understanding so much.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, a huge thanks to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Aunt Isabel.
It's been a pleasure.
Always. And to our amazing listeners, keep those wheels turning, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.
Until then, happy reading, everyone.
Bye, everyone.